When niambie, ebu decide, it's not your time, hiyo widha. When niambie, ebu decide, it's not your time, hiyo widha. Unadhani bila wewe hatuwezi ishi? News flash, tutaishi fiti, tutakusahau kama kamisi, na memory tutoe kwa akili. Una behave ni kawe tuko na option, pia sisi, hiyo ni caution. Kasi huruma singekuwa na wewe, usipo change itabidi nitembeze. Last chance, ati last chance, last chance tuliacha last year. Hiyo ndio ufalami sitaki kusikia, usipo change kanyanga. We niambie, ebu decide, it's not your time, hiyo widha. We niambie, ebu decide, it's not your time, hiyo widha. We decide, kauta change, it's not your time, hiyo widha. We niambie, ebu decide, it's not your time. Unani threat, utaniacha, si uniache. Unatu threat, utaacha kazi, si uache. Unadhani tunajali, ujinga ni kudhani bila wewe hatutasonga, tunasonga. Ujinga ni kudhani bila wewe hatutaomoka, tunaomoka. We ni dam, dididididam, you're so dumb. Hii dunia si yako pekee, you're so dumb. Utashtuka kauna ngoja ni kufuate, usipo change kila mtu njia yake. We niambie, ebu decide, it's not your time, hiyo widha.
Hello, everyone. I hope you're all well, and welcome to today's Data Science Learning webinar. Sorry. Okay. Yes. So I'll start by first running us through the agenda for today. So we'll go through the rules of engagement, then I'll run the main session, and then we'll pause for some Q&A, and then there'll be updates, announcements, and then we could close. Right. So the rules of engagement are one, if you have any question, you could post it in the Q&A chat if it's related to this webinar. If it's much more technical and might require us to research and find information for you, I'll suggest to post that on Answerbase, where our tutors will provide you with the best support. Also, the chat will be opened for ad hoc interaction with me. If you have any questions or comments, kindly post them in the chat. Most importantly, let's listen, let's learn, and let's share. Right, but before I get in, I have a quick announcement from one of our tutors, Andy, who took last week's webinar. So she shared AWS Cloud Quest game with you, and she wants some feedback. Basically, how did you feel about that particular resource? Was it beneficial for you? Was it easier learning some of these concepts in the game? You know, this is the type of feedback that helps us to craft the type of resources we share with you at a later time. So in the chat, you could just tell us whether it was beneficial for you, whether you had any issues, so that we figure out ways by which we could improve the other resources that we could share with you, right? So I'll allow for about 30 seconds before we get into our icebreaker for the day. All right. So we have a much better way to go around that. Naomi will create a poll for us. So maybe sometime in the course, we'll be able to collect our feedback so that it will be much more useful to us when we analyze it. So let's get into the session for today. Now, the question is, what's your favorite way to relax after a long day of learning or working? All right. What's your favorite way to relax after a long day of learning or working? You know, I know a guy, you guys might know him as well. His favorite pastime is to learn some more. His first name starts with an S and ends with an N. You may know him, I'm not calling anyone out. However, for some of us, we like to watch movies, as I can see, take a walk, sleep, play football, or some board games. a few of us also like to just go out with friends at night, have a beer or two, some meat, and then just come back home. I mean, the reason for this question is basically for us to reflect on all the hard work and things that we do and how we take some time to recharge, right? So for me, a couple of years ago, when I was doing the data engineering course at Explore, there were times when I could run into like very, very, very difficult problems, and all my research and questions could not solve them, right? Surprisingly, or what used to happen was whenever I took a shower, hot shower, or like I was just lying down, relaxing and trying to shut out the mess I'm in, something pops up, and then I figure out what I'm supposed to do. This just goes to tell us how important it is for us to always reset, recharge, recharge, and just like recalibrate ourselves for the milestones that are ahead, right? So when you have a task, give it your all, take a step back, have a retrospective, breathe in, breathe out, and then we can work on the next milestones, right? I hope that sounds like a plan. All right, great. So for today, we have two main learning outcomes, right? We want to understand the basics of AWS cloud security and to understand the shared responsibility model. So when someone says AWS cloud security, what are they trying to say? And two, what is the shared responsibility model? So while the presentation keeps going on, let's just cast our minds back and try and draw that link to the learning outcomes and see if indeed we are understanding the basics of AWS cloud security, and two, whether we understand what the shared responsibility model means, right? Great. So this is our introduction. Now, what is AWS security? For us to properly define what AWS security is, we need to know what cloud security is. And cloud security basically is all the rules, all the policies, all the technologies that are available to us to ensure that our infrastructure, our data is kept safe in cloud, right? So then AWS security basically will mean that all the rules, all the policies, all the technologies that are available to us by AWS that will allow that the infrastructure that we are using and our data in cloud is kept safe. So here we are just saying that navigating the ever-evolving world of cloud security can be daunting, but AWS provides a comprehensive suite of tools and services to safeguard our data. This presentation will explore the fundamental principles of AWS security, empowering us to build robust, secure, and compliant cloud infrastructure. Now, so for us to understand this, AWS has some responsibilities it needs to take care of. And you and I, as customers, also have some responsibilities, right? For AWS, they are responsible for security of the cloud. When we say responsible for security of the cloud, this is what we mean. Think of you spinning up an EC2 instance or spinning up an S3 bucket, right? All these services sit on some hardware, and these hardware are kept in a data center. So AWS first has to find a secure location to put up a data center, right? Determine whether it's going to have security guards, it's going to have biometric access, CCTV, all these things to ensure that the physical location of all those data centers are secure. Like everything is good. That's the first thing. They now need to map out how can we say for these 4 data centers that we have in our global infrastructure, we will view this probably as a region. How can we define a different set as an availability zone or an edge location? So that AWS global infrastructure and everything, AWS has to ensure that all those things are secure and they come up with that particular setup. When it comes to the compute, the networking devices, the storage, the databases, all these things have to be kept secure And the person responsible for that is AWS. Now, for you and I, when we create these accounts that allow us access into the cloud, what we need to ensure is that, for instance, when we spin up an instance and we are running an operating system, say Windows Server 2018 or something, or 2002 or something, right? We have to ensure that we run patches when there's a need. Why do we need to run software patches? When someone wants to get into your system, they try to find hotspots or vulnerabilities, and patches basically fix these type of vulnerabilities. So for you as a user, ensure that there's always like periodic updates, making sure you're patching your OS and everything. When it comes to your firewall configurations, you're setting the appropriate rules. When it comes to your network, everything you do has to be done per the rules that have been defined. So you ensure that you are being safe whilst you are using the services in cloud. And that's why we say the customer is responsible for security in the cloud, whereas AWS is responsible for the security of the cloud. So in a nutshell, this is what we are saying. AWS will manage the security of the cloud, including physical data centers, network infrastructure, and global backbone, right? And then we as customers will be responsible for securing our own data, our applications, and the resources within the AWS environment. So now the shared responsibility is, how can AWS and us as customers work together to ensure the overall security and compliance of cloud-based systems? So if AWS releases a new feature that is set to help you, manage or secure your infrastructure better, make sure you apply that, like keep up to date with it, and ensure that you are, with every new feature or every new update that comes in the technical documentation, you apply that to your infrastructure and to the services that you're using, right? So basically, this is what we mean by the shared responsibility model. So now, in our earlier webinars, we've gone through how we categorize cloud systems, right? We've gone through the public-private cloud, the hybrid cloud, and more, right? But the other ways by which you can still categorize the cloud services, right? We could have infrastructure as a service, we can have platform as a service, and then we can have software as a service. The difference between those three tiers of categorization is just basically the amount of hands-on that a user has to put in. So when it comes to infrastructure as a service, an example basically is AWS or say Microsoft Azure. The only thing that the provider is going to ensure that you have is your data center or physical plant or building, the networking and firewalls, security, service and storage. These things are going to be provided to you. Now, your own IT staff will do the whole configuration and everything. So you're allowed much more access to how your systems work, right? Then we have platform as a service. An example for platform as a service is, I don't know if any of us have done some web development or app development, it will be like Heroku, where you don't even need to worry about the operating system. You're just launching like a container that has everything in there, right? The provider ensures that everything from the infrastructure, from your data center, from your networking, service and storage, and the OS is ready for you. And so you only do the things that are necessary for deployment, right? Now, we have software as a service. A lot of us use software as a service. Examples of those would be like your Google Workspace. When you open your Google Workspace and you go to the application service, you see that you have Gmail, which is your mail service. You have Slides, which is like a presentation application. You have Sheets, you have Docs, you have Sites. All these things are applications that are ready to use. All you do is you just use them for the purposes that you need them for, right? So that's software as a service. And these are the three different categorizations. And one thing we need to keep in mind is that regardless of what we do, of which tier of categorization that we are using, we need to ensure that we have security in mind. So for instance, I'm using my Gmail to collect information of my learners, right? The underlying infrastructure I have nothing to do with. However, I am the one entering my learners' email addresses, their phone numbers, and all that, which contains personal identifiable information, PII. Now, if I put this somewhere that other people can access it, it's not the fault of the provider, but rather my fault. And so it's just a reminder that for everything that we do, we need to keep and be security conscious about it, right? So now let's move into AWS's identity and access management. So IAM for short basically is a free service that's available to all users of AWS, and it's a global service, right? So it's free. It allows us to create and manage like users within that have access to the same resources that we do. An example would be that I have a root account by virtue of creating an account with AWS, right? And I am working with my friend to work on an ML project, and my friend is better with AWS than I am, or launching like a container than I am. And so I want to create an account for my friend. With my root account, I can just create a user beneath that and then limit what he can do to just launching a container or creating like an EC2 instance. Remember that every service you use in AWS, most services are billable, and the other ones that are not even billable are under like the free tier offering. But most of the services that we are using are billable. And so if someone goes to launch, say, an X3 large, by the end of the month, you probably be bankrupt, right? By the end of the month, you probably be bankrupt. And so these are some of the things we need to keep in mind and ensure that even for ourselves, when we create like an AWS account, we create an IAM account and then dissociate some of the things from it. So we'll go through in the practical session, basically how can you create a user, give it some policies, and then we'll go into that user and see how well that works, right? So to summarize, they're just saying that IAM allows us to precisely manage who has access to our AWS resources. And also by granting the users the minimum set of permissions, we reduce the risk of unauthorized access. Also, there's multi-factor authentication, which is basically just a layer on top of your credentials. So after you sign in, there's a layer on top. It could be an OTP. It could be OTP being a one-time password. It could be a puzzle that is sent to your email. It could be anything at all, but just an extra layer to ensure that if your username and password leaks, there's an extra layer of security that protects you from harm, right? And then it also provides a single place for us to manage identities, roles, and permissions across the environment. Now, the essential components of IAM are the user, the group, policy, and role. When we say user, we mean anyone, you or myself, right? Any person or application with access to an AWS account. Now, for all of us on this call, with the same, if we have the same access permission, then we will be a group, right? And then for a policy, we are saying that it's a document that will define your access to specific resources. And this is done using JSON. And so you would have your JSON structure opened, and inside you have statements that say explicitly allow whoever has this policy access to do A, or explicitly state that deny anyone who has this policy the ability to do something else. And now we have a role. The role basically is used to grant temporary access to an AWS service. And so if you want an application or a user to have temporary access to a particular service, this might be a very high billable service. And so just a temporary access, you could just assign a role to it. So this is basically like an overview of what I'm trying to say. For AWS IAM, you have identities and you have permissions. The identities are the entities or the things that will request for a permission. And those are users, groups, roles, and credentials. However, on the permission side, you can see we have policies, and within the policies, we have statements that will explicitly tell whoever that is assigned this policy what they need or what they're allowed to do. Just to pause and recap all the things we've said, right? We started by defining what cloud security is. We explained that it's all the technologies and rules that are available to us to keep our infrastructure and data safe within the cloud. Then we spoke about the AWS shared responsibility model, where we spoke about the things that AWS is in charge of, what we are in charge of, and how AWS and us as users can work together, right? To ensure that all the things we have in cloud are safe. After that, we've spoken about the categorizations of cloud. We spoke about infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, and software as a service. And then spoke about a free service called the Identity and Access Management Service, IAM, which is a free or global service that's available to all of us. It's important. So now, at this point, I would want us to go into AWS organizations and security. When we say AWS organizations, we are thinking of, here's the scenario. We work for, say, a telecom company, and in that telecom company, in the IT environment or IT department, we have a service delivery team, we have an IT infrastructure team, and then we have like a data team, right? So these are different organizational units. We need to find a way to say that for a service delivery team, these are the services that you're using. And so we are going to define what the maximum threshold is, what is it that you can't go beyond, right? Maybe, so we will say no one should be able to launch an X3 large instance. So that's basically a threshold, and that is what we call a service control policy, an SCP, okay? So we can determine the SCPs for all these organizational units. So within the organizational units, as a user, you will not be able to exceed these thresholds that we've given to you, right? What does this give an organization? Why is it this important to us? It helps us centrally manage and secure multiple AWS accounts. There's consolidated billing. So then as the CFO or as the data team, we can pull consolidated billing and share with finance so that we can see what every organizational unit is using, how much they're spending, and whether that works within our budgets, right? And as I said, the service control policies, the SCPs, are what we use to enforce the security and compliance of the standards across our AWS organization. In securing our AWS accounts, we've already spoken about enabling multi-factor authentication, right? And also using strong password policies. So some of the password policies I see these days, especially if you are setting up a new user in AWS, would be ensure you have 8 characters, have an alphanumeric in there, have a special character, and the likes, right? Another thing you can do is always log. If you set up any service, always ensure that there's a login or monitoring service attached to it. Why is this important? Whenever there's an unauthorized access to any of these services, you should be able to see. So we have services that will prevent things like denial of service and the rest, but it's always good to be able to see all the requests, maybe the API requests that are coming to hit your service, right? So it's important to keep our account secure. We've also spoken about identity management, where we said that using AWS's Identity and Access Management Service, we can manage user permissions and control access to our AWS resources. Now, there's key management, right? For key management, it's basically for people who require programmatic access to your AWS account. When I say programmatic access, I just mean someone on their PC probably trying to move some file from their device to maybe an S3 bucket in cloud, right? For you to be able to do this, you first need to generate some encryption keys or access keys that will help first in encrypting your data when you're moving it from your device to the cloud. And two, so that when your data gets to cloud, encrypt it at rest. When we say you're encrypting something at rest, we basically mean that whilst the information or the data sits on your hard drive or whatever storage medium you're using, that particular data is encrypted, right? And also, we need to utilize security groups and network ACLs. So when we say security groups, we are basically saying that these things act as virtual firewalls, controlling inbound and outbound traffic to your instances. When we say inbound and outbound traffic, you've created an instance, right? And that instance has to be, or most likely, is connected to other instances or other services in cloud. Now, how can I build like a quarantine around my services? How can I ensure that only the traffic that I have asked to come in is coming in? That's what we call the ingress traffic. That's the only thing we are receiving, and then ensure that for the egress traffic or the outbound traffic, it's only things that I have specified are allowed to leave that particular ecosystem. This is very important, and this is another way by which you can control unauthorized access to our services. The next thing is network ACLs. To try to explain ACLs or access control lists, let's take a step back, right? First, what is a network, right? Because we are saying that it controls traffic at the subnet level. For us to understand this, let's first understand what a network is. I like to define network as basically having a device, at least two devices, right, and a transmission medium. So being able to connect one or more devices over a transmission medium. And so like my phone, my PC, and then a transmission medium being like my Type-C cable or like a USB cable, right? That's how I can bring it down to the barest minimum. So basically, how can I connect two devices via transmission medium? So you can create networks, but then once your network starts becoming large, there are ways by which we can, again, create like smaller groups. So think of it as, again, in our company, we have the finance department, we have the IT department, we have the legal department. Maybe you want to create like a small network for the legal department so that everything within the legal department stays there. And then people in finance should not be able to have access to this unless they are given authorization, right? So then we can create something we call a subnet, which is basically like a smaller network. If you are thinking of, if you want to research better on what subnets are, you can go ahead and do that. But just think of it as just like a smaller network within a larger network, right? So for you to control traffic at the subnet level, you need to provide like network access control lists, provide us with an additional layer of security for our VPCs, right? And then finally, we are saying that in using security groups and these ACLs together, we can create a comprehensive network security strategy for our accounts or for our organizations, right? Earlier within the presentation or within the webinar, I made mention of logging and monitoring, right? So AWS also has some services that are available to us so that we could log and monitor the things that happen within our ecosystem. So for one, we have CloudTrail, right? So CloudTrail helps us capture API calls and account activity for auditing and compliance purposes. Yeah, the auditing and compliance could just mean that are we getting an unauthorized like API calls? Do we know exactly where these calls are coming from? Just audit and make sure that no one else has access to our API documentation, right? Then we have CloudWatch. CloudWatch also helps us monitor resources, set alarms, and creates dashboards to gain visibility into our AWS environment. Then we have AWS config, where we can track the resource configurations, detect whether there have been any changes, and ensure compliance. And finally, we have guard duty that uses ML to detect and respond to potential security threats in our environment. Right. So these are 4 examples of services that allow us to log, not just log the things that happen on our set on our or in our environments, but also allows us to monitor, right? Just some more light on what we mean by AWS encryption and key management. So I've alluded to this already, but when we say server-side encryption, what we basically mean is that once data gets into the AWS ecosystem and it sits on any resource, it's encrypted at rest. Encrypted at rest, which means that the data, even when spilled, there's something we need to be careful of. But I'm saying when the data is spilled, no one can have access to it. But then when you make a public S3 bucket and you leave it open and someone enters into the bucket, then the person can see your information, right? However, when the information is stored on the drive and it's taken from the drive, no one can have access to it because it's encrypted. So these are 2 different things that I just wanted to point out. We also say client-side encryption, where you're saying that before uploading the data that you're trying to send to AWS, right, we encrypt the data before we do that. So this allows us to maintain control over the encryption keys, because the access keys are assigned to your specific accounts. Also, the key management service allows us to create, manage, and use encryption keys securely for our AWS resources and applications. And finally, certificate manager. So for any traffic that travels across HTTPS, you need to have a certificate, right? And the certificate manager allows us to, 1, provision that certificate, manage it, and as well deploy it. So as always, if you see a website that has HTTP prefix, you know that you have to be careful with whatever you do on that site. But when you have HTTPS, and you still have to be security conscious as always, but then you can be a little bit lax because you know that the communication is over a secured layer, and AWS allows us to manage this using the certificate manager. So we're trying to wrap up, right? So we'll just talk about the compliance and regulatory considerations and end with some of the best practices. So for security compliance, they're only saying that AWS will assist us as customers in achieving compliance with various industry standards and regulations. For global reach, we say that AWS services are available in multiple geographies, enabling customers to meet data sovereignty requirements. So when you go to AWS, before you launch a service, you can see whether you are using EU, West 1, maybe US, East 1. These are different availability zones that you can create or enable your services in, right? So it also allows us for global reach. Now we say there's also comprehensive auditing, because AWS provides detailed compliance reports and third-party audits to help customers demonstrate compliance. And finally, one of our learning outcomes for today, which is that customers are responsible for configuring their AWS resources to meet the specific compliance needs, right? Now, for our best practices, we are saying that once you've made up your mind that you're going to move from on-prem solutions and go to move from on-prem solutions and go into the cloud, we need to start talking about continuously monitoring our AWS environments for security events, threats, and compliance issues, right? Continuously monitoring our AWS environments for security events, threats, and compliance issues. If you have an infrastructure, if you have a CIO or a security team in your company, this is one of the things that will be chief on their agenda. They would always ensure that they have periodic audits audits, right, to ensure that whatever is going in and out of the services and their AWS environments is logged, audited, and they ensure that it meets the compliance needs, right? The next one is automation and scripting. We need to automate security tasks such as user provisioning and configuration management to ensure consistency and reduce manual efforts. We all know that manual efforts can lead to errors. We want to create maybe 5 different accounts and we want to give them specific accesses. But because you're doing it manually, you might forget 1 or 2 things or end up granting someone more access than they need. For a lot of the things that we do, once we understand how they work, we need to start moving into how can we automate this? How can we write a script that will ensure that once I run, all the things I need done will be done. This one ensures that there's minimal error, and 2, and ensures that you have some time back to yourself to do other things, right? You maximize the time that you have and you are as efficient as possible. Finally, periodic audits as an individual as well. Regularly review your security policies and permissions and configurations to identify and address any gaps or vulnerabilities. Right. So at this point, we are done with the theory part. I would want us to quickly go into the practical side for today, where we are just going to try to sign into an AWS account, right? So for this and for the purpose of what I'm going to do, I will sign in as a root user. Here, there's a description. It says, account owner that performs tasks requiring unrestricted access, underline unrestricted access. So I'm going to go into my root account and sign in. As you can see, it's asking for an MFA code, and I use an authenticator app. So I then need to go find my authenticator app, launch it, and that'll take a moment, and then look for the current OTP on it. So this is AWS. Okay, great. So 633290, and then I can submit this. Okay, so I'm greeted with the marketplace. So this is, I think I'm in the wrong place. No, I'm in the wrong place. I'm in the AWS marketplace. I need to be in AWS services signing. So I'll just sign in one more time. What just happened? This? Okay, so sign in. Sign in. 30406-845. Submit. Okay, so I'm greeted with my services. I know we all have AWS accounts as of now, so you can see that these are my recently visited services. I have my applications on the top right corner. If you come down, you can see cost and usage for the month. You can see my forecasted month-end cost, a breakdown on some of the things that I'm using AWS for, and just a few other things, open issues, schedule changes, other notifications, all that, right? So anytime you sign into your root account, this is what you're greeted with. Now, if I wanted to launch an EC2 instance, I could just go to services and launch an EC2 instance, right? I have no restrictions, nothing, right? So it already tells me I have no instance running, no auto scaling groups, nothing. Now, what I want us to do is go to security and try and create an IAM user. Okay, so we are in here. There's a dashboard. I can just go to users and then I'll add a new user. So for this user, I'm going to call it DS Learning, right? So DS Learning. In case I forget, let's remember the username for the account is DS Learning. And so here I say I want to create an IAM user. You can specify whether you want to auto-generate a password for the person, or you can create a custom password for the person. Just for us to move quickly, I am going to create a password quickly. Okay, so password created. I'm going to uncheck the box here that says users must create a new password at next sign-in. This is a very recommended action, but for purposes of this webinar, I'm not going to check it. So if you were creating the account for someone else, you could always just check this box. And when the person signs in on for the very first time, they'll be prompted to create their own password. Okay, so just click on next. Now, it's going to ask me to set permissions, right? Do I want to add the user to a group that already exists? Do I want to copy permissions from a certain place? I want to attach a policy directly. I'll attach the policy directly to this particular user so that all we are saying is that for this particular user, this is the only policy that applies to them. And the policy I'm going to give them will be the S3 full access. So we'll go and create an S3 bucket in the other accounts. But you can see down here that there are different policies that are created by default. So you have Alexa for Business full access. You have Elastic Beanstalk full access. Like that, just almost every service has a policy that has been generated. And so you can come in here and then edit it to fit what you're trying to do. So I'm looking for something along the lines of S3. So S3 full access. Okay, so now you can see that over here, I told you that for the policies, it's a JSON file. So we have this inside the JSON file, you have statements. So the statements start with where the square brackets begin. And then you state in there explicitly whether you want to allow the policyholder to do something. In my case, you can see that there's no deny statement, it's just allow. So the effect here says allow. To allow whoever owns this policy or whoever has this policy access to everything in S3. So you see S3 and then it shows the star, which is basically everything, right? Now it says resource. For this particular parameter, you can specify a particular S3 bucket. I can just put the resource name there and say, you know what, give this particular person access to only this bucket. Let him have full access to only this bucket. But for this, we are just going to leave it as is and say, grant the person the ability to create any S3 buckets with the person's account. So now that you select the policy, you can click on next, right? And then we can just create the user. Great. So the user has been created. Now, what I'll ask is that we leave this particular account and go into the new account that we've created. So I just come here and I put in the login. So this is basically a new sign-in. You're just doing a new sign-in. Forget about the root account. I can sign out of it if I want. That is gone. We've created a new user called DS Learning. So here, the account ID is in there. I'm just going to say DS Learning, and I'm going to type in my password. Okay. So now we are inside as a user. But then one thing you notice is all the other things that I could see with mine, this particular user can't. This particular user, for instance, can't see all the cost and usage metrics. So it says access denied, right? If I even go to say RDS, trying to launch like RDS, if I go to create that database, let's see what happens. Oh, I guess this is taking a bit. Can just try EC2 because site just loads faster. So let's just try with an EC2 instance. You notice that almost everything has an error attached to it. Even if there's a launch instance button here, even if you try to click on the launch instance button, what you realize is that none of the AMIs, which is basically what the OS you're going to run on your instance, is available to you. But if I go to S3, if I go to my services and I go to S3, I'm allowed to create a bucket. So it says, what region? I'm going to leave it here, give it a name, DS Learning, right? And then I'm going to disable everything. Here, you can decide whether you want to grant public access to your buckets, which I'll strongly tell you not to. So I'll block all public access, and then we can just go ahead and then create our buckets. Okay, so it says the bucket name already exists. I'm just giving one. DS Learning one. Let's see if this works. Create bucket. Right, so now for this particular IAM user that we've created, we have access to creating S3, like S3 buckets, and only S3 buckets. So basically, this is what we've been trying to say from the beginning of the session to now. At this point, I will pause and take some questions, right? Okay, so one of the questions on AWS Academy registration doesn't allow for creating new accounts. So so this is one thing I'll say. Whilst doing my own whilst doing my own learning, right, I had to create my personal AWS account, right? All you have to ensure is that when you create your own AWS account, you do not, right, launch instances that are too expensive for your budget and stuff like that. You can play around with some of these things, but always check what the billable information is. How much does it cost for me to run this particular service and things like that, right? Are there any more questions? Because I see two questions in the Q&A. Or you could ask me to go back to my portal, and if you want me to showcase anything, I'll be more than glad to do that. Alrighty, so if there are no questions, then I'm going to hand over to Naomi, or will Jane take the announcements for today?
Edwin, can you kindly share your screen?
Okay, just a moment. All right. Okay.
Okay, thank you, Edmond. Before I go into the announcements, I just want to announce that the Cloud Quest game feedback, the poll is launched. So if you haven't filled it yet, please go ahead and fill it. And then after that poll is closed in a few minutes, in let's say 2 minutes, I'll be launching the learning outcomes poll so that you can give feedback on how this learning webinar was. Did it enhance your understanding of the course content for this week? So I'll give you a few minutes to fill out the Cloud Quest game poll before I um, launch the other poll. So for the announcements for today, please note that your cloud. Oh,
Sorry.
sorry. All right.
Yes. Goodness.
If you haven't filled out the poll, please go ahead and fill it out. Um, Edmond, if you don't mind, would you like to answer more questions in the Q and A while that is going on? There are two more
Okay,
questions
so
here.
there's one that I wanted to answer that's been answered, which is basically how do we learn AWS when we are going to be charged? I guess that's what AWS Academy is there for. So you basically have like a sandbox where you can read about some of these things and learn, right? One good thing about AWS is it has something we call the free tier. So basically, for all new accounts that are created, you have like they're giving you limits where you can do certain things for free, right? So you just need to read a little bit more on what the free tier provides, create an account, and make use of some of these things, right? It's really important that you own your learning journey. Of course, it would have been great if like you had access to AWS accounts, but then who is going to be paying for all the things you want to try your hands on? Because these things are very expensive, right? But then it's investment into your own skill, into your own knowledge base. So I'll just say, read into the free tier, apply for some of these zip funding, scholarships, things like that, that gives you access to AWS accounts for free so that you can learn and do all that, right? And for the second question, which is about AWS Academy giving password error, I'd say kindly post this in answer base so that we maybe investigate further to see if what the issue could be, right? Um, I get so for all the questions under AWS Academy, just post them on answer base and we will provide you with instructions as soon as we can, right?
Sorry, Edmund.
Yes.
Actually,
Hi.
they're supposed to skip it because they're only doing the theory for this. For
Oh,
this,
okay.
they're not gonna get
Oh,
any
okay.
login. Yes.
Okay. So for AWS Academy on this course, you're not getting any login, but you can apply for AWS Academy on your own, right? Outside of this, so you can have access to the sandbox and then launch or learn about everything that you need. That's just extra learning. But what we are providing you is basically the knowledge of the services and why people are moving from on-prem to cloud and why other people are using like a balance of both on-prem and cloud.
All right. Thank you, Edmond, for that. Thank you, Andiswa. So I'm going to launch the learning outcomes poll. Please ensure that you fill it before you leave this webinar. Then for the announcements for today, please note that your cloud security MCQ is due for submission on Monday, the 15th of July by 9:59 p.m. GMT. So take note of that and remember to carefully utilize your supplementary attempts. A watch party live on Saturday at 5 p.m. GMT. So take note. If you have friends that weren't here today, please notify them of this. We'll also share announcements on the portal and in the emails with the session details and everything. And please note that our webinars will continue to hold every Thursday at 12:30 p.m. GMT. Please take note of the time, take note of your time zone so you don't miss out on any important information. And then I hope you are still participating in your study group discussions. Now is the time more than ever to reach out to your peers and engage in learning together because the exam is closer than ever. We're already in week 42, closing out week 42, and we have 2 more weeks, or is it 3, We have a few more weeks to the end of this cloud computing sprint. So ensure that you are engaging with your peers in the study group so you can get up to speed with the learning and prepare for your final exam. And aside preparing for the final exam, please remember your FIS content. Your month 10 FIS content can be located in the FIS space on the community portal. So make sure you are staying up to date with that as well. Remember, your answer base is there for your technical content related support, just like Edwin said at the beginning of this webinar. So make sure that you are utilizing that platform as well. And then remember Layer and Zendesk for any program related information. Sorry. And your community tab, just like I said, to engage with your peers, listen to share your wins, what you feel has helped you throughout this program, and basically your highlights for this program. Thank you for joining today's webinar, and we will see you next week. Thank you.
Edmond, you can move to the next end of the slide and play the music.